This is the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. This is the iPhone 15 Pro Max. These phone cameras are about to go to battle, and so am I. Last year, we tested the iPhone 15 Pro Max against the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, and the iPhone won with 6.5 points to 3.5. So let's see if Samsung's AI-powered 2024 flagship can claim redemption. Oh, and the loser of this video gets shot by an actual tank. So, I want to start with slow-mo. Can you see the happy look on my face? This is the look of a man who has been asking, nay, begging companies to show some love to the feature for about 5 years, and finally, the S24 Ultra brings it. The phone's capable of shooting 4K footage at 120 frames per second, and I can confirm this is true 4K slow-mo, with no strings attached. Will you notice the difference versus the iPhone when watching back on your phone screen? Probably not, but can you tell when you blow it up onto a TV? Absolutely. Plus, combine that with the fact that any video on the Samsung can now be instantly slowed down even further on the spot by just holding down on it, and I think we can safely say that Samsung has once again become the slow king. Now, because slow-mo itself is probably not important enough to be its own category, we bundle it together into the overall category called special modes, which also includes portrait mode video as well as ultra close-up macro shots. But since both of those features are very comparable between the two phones, like this right here is portrait mode video, and this is what both phones' macro shots look like. The iPhone can get closer, which is really useful, but Samsung's processing makes their shots look crispier. I think it's time to hand the overall category of special modes to Samsung. Selfie-wise, well, I mean, Samsung's last phone beat the iPhone, so its successor naturally wins too. The way I see it is the iPhone is a very consistent 8 out of 10 for selfies. Never exceptional, but always good. The Samsung, though, swings between a 9 most of the time, with Samsung's best being definitely better than the iPhone's best, and then the occasional 6, where it seems to either not quite capture in time, leading to slightly softer than expected face details, or just blurs the face of someone you've unwittingly pulled into your photo, where the iPhone often still manages to keep it sharp. But 85% of the time, I think this takes better shots. They're crispier, they're more impressive, they often look as good as rear camera photos, and they make you look nice. Whereas oftentimes when I take photos with the iPhone, I just feel like I look so rough that I'm half tempted to run the photos through Facetune before showing them to anyone. Now, one of the biggest changes we've been told the S24 Ultra is going to come with is improved noise reduction. And I'm going to be honest with you, if Samsung actually manages to fix their noise problem, well, that's bigger than slow-mo. That's bigger than all of this AI stuff. Why? Because noisy videos are the single biggest weakness of Samsung's cameras by far. And so if they're actually gone now, that's like finally cutting off the weights and letting this thing fly, allowing people to finally focus on all the awesome stuff these cameras can do without having to constantly caveat it with this annoying side effect that seems to follow Samsung around like a shadow. So, is it better? I would say it is. Faces are crisper than they were on the S23 Ultra, and it does get less noise in the videos you take. And you know, at times, the S24 Ultra shoots such good front camera video that looks so real, it can make the iPhone's footage look fake and unnatural. Samsung's done a lot of things right here. But the main problem of the darker areas of your shot suffering from ugly amounts of noise, that hasn't been solved, especially when you move the camera. It's 5% better than last year, but like, you know, still 50% behind the iPhone. I really want to give Samsung the draw here because of how good I know it can be, but in their current states, if someone offered me one of these two cameras for the purposes of vlogging, until Samsung fixes this and also improves the dynamic range to the iPhone's level, I would pick the iPhone. So far though in this battle, that is 2 points to 1 point. So this camera comparison is already a very different story to the last one, and we might just be shooting an iPhone today. And what really starts to cement Samsung's lead here is the camera app itself, which is actually one of the biggest changes compared to when the S23s launched last year. It looks better, for starters, with icons having been cleared up and animations updated, but it's also functionally better. It's smoother, like navigating between the different modes, and more surprisingly, being able to zoom all the way in and out is now nearly as smooth as the iPhone. I have no idea why it's taken this long to get here, but let me tell you, it feels pretty good to be here. You can now just tap to change your photo resolution, and changing your video properties makes way more sense too. This right here is the kind of practical, compact menu design that it would be really cool to see Apple do too. Because I get that the iPhone's camera really tries to keep things simple, but this is now pretty decluttered, but also while being able to access all your different camera options without having to navigate to a completely separate part of the phone to change half of them. And you actually just get way more options with the Samsung too. You know those kind of ultra niche things that you think only you care about and no one would actually make a setting for? Yeah,
Samsung gives you that level of control. Things like if you set the camera to 50 megapixel or 200 megapixel mode, whether or not the camera should keep those as the default the next time you open the camera app. Or like whether you want to swipe down of your shutter button to either burst fire photos or create an instant GIF. And the biggest thing with this S24 Ultra is that it's faster to take photos too. Now, it's still not as fast as the iPhone, but there's no longer a massive gap between them. And I'd say the Samsung shoots fast enough now that it doesn't feel like a problem. It doesn't stand out as a sluggish camera like it used to. The only remaining weakness of this camera app is the fact that it's a little hard to use one-handed. It's slightly the sharp, boxy shape of the phone, but mostly just the fact that many of the options are fixed at the top, instead of how the iPhone can bring them all to your thumb with a single swipe. So I came pretty close at this point to just calling this category a draw and moving on. But the thing that's really tipped the scales for me is the screen brightness on the Samsung. I did not expect to find it as useful as I have, but if you allow Samsung's automatic brightness to take over, it gets so bright that even though I've never felt like shooting outdoors was an issue on the iPhone, this screen is so clear that it makes it feel like an issue in comparison. So yeah, I think Samsung's done enough this generation to turn the camera app all the way from a loss into a win. And related to this, I think now's the time to introduce a new category into our camera comparisons going forward. Editing features. I've thought about doing this for a long time, but the S24 feels like a very obvious place to start. It feels like we're on the brink of a new era in which, thanks to really powerful artificial intelligence, it's no longer just about the photos and videos you can take, but also about the photos and videos you can make. Or, to put it another way, a lot of the camera's capability now comes after the shot has been captured. So, who does that side of the experience better? Well, in the iPhone's corner, the editor is fairly simple. It definitely leaves you wanting more. Like, I really wish there was the ability to make a video that you've taken 2 times or 3 times speed. I've needed that quite a bit. But credit where credit's due, everything that is here is so fast. You're never waiting for any action. There's no loading bars. Making photo and video edits happens literally as smoothly as changing your volume. And you want to crop something? You don't even need to be in the editor. You just zoom in while browsing and click the crop button. But then in Samsung's corner, you absolutely have more options. Like, you just swipe up on a shot now, and thanks to the new Pro Visual Engine that understands photos better, you have a bunch of suggested edits, like background effect, which is actually pretty cool. You can add the portrait mode background blur, but also change the style of an existing portrait mode shot to make it look like you're having a particularly action-packed kind of day. I love this feature. There's a lot of options now. There's remaster, which is usually a general brightening and sharpening of a photo. More often than not, it does make a positive difference, but it's more for older shots taken on much worse cameras than this. It doesn't really do much to already good photos. Oh, but also the ability to erase reflections, which, if you like me find yourself on a London balcony with the most incredible view but a massive glass sheet in front of you, can be a very powerful effect. And I love that these features are mostly just a tap away. It takes away that whole, can I really be bothered to fully jump into an editor for this one specific photo? The phone takes away that load from you. And I haven't even talked about the biggest change to Samsung's editing, which is the new generative AI image editor, which is pretty good. If you're like I used to be and your current default for repairing photos is like the healing brush, then this very much will be a revolutionary step up in being able to move subjects, to extend your image and erase things you didn't want to be there. It does need an internet connection, and it's not super fast, but the upside is that it's kind of like those really powerful AI websites without needing a monthly subscription like most of them ask you for. Oh, at least not yet. Samsung's saying that these AI features will only be free till the end of 2025, which, I mean, it makes sense. They do create a significant load on Samsung servers, but that's all the more reason that we should be demanding AI features that run offline on your phone and don't require them. But even with that caveat, I have to say, Samsung's editing suite is way ahead of Apple's, and the pressure's really on for the iPhone to start integrating AI in a more explicit way very soon. Right, I think it's time we address the zoom situation. Ever since Samsung decided to go all in on this whole space zoom thing with the S20 Ultra, regardless of how important or unimportant you think zoom is, one thing you can say is they have consistently dominated the category. But within the span of just a few years, the iPhones have kind of under the radar gone from pretty bad to very good at zoom too. Partly because the zoom lens magnifications have gone up from 2x to 3x to now 5x on the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Partly because of new image processing techniques like photonic engine, which can sharpen up photos taken beyond that 5 times number. And partly because the iPhone takes particularly clear, noise-free, zoomed-in video, all leading Apple to, for the first time, taking home the draw in last year's comparison. Now, the reason for the entire backstory is so that you can also see how strange it is that while all of that is happening, this time round, Samsung has decided to scale back their zoom. The previous 10 times zoom lens and 3 times zoom lens combo has been swapped out for a 5x and a 3x. And it brings me no joy to say this, but as much as Samsung wants you to believe that this 5x lens is just as good because it's a higher resolution camera compared to the previous 10x, your ability to zoom in far is actually slightly worse. Let me show you. So this is a side-by-side of the S24 Ultra versus last year's S23 Ultra. And you'll see that as we start to zoom in beyond the phone's optical ranges, it looks okay. The AI processing on the new phone is more sophisticated than it was. So your photos don't look ultra grainy like you might expect them to. But at the same time, you can absolutely tell that the new phone is seeing less, that it understands what it's shooting less well and is having to use more processing to bring it back into line. Here's another example at 100x zoom. S24 Ultra, again, the actual core details, less real, more artificial. And okay, that's fine, that's one thing. But what I didn't expect to say today is what that translates to, which is that actually, now, the iPhone is the better camera for zooming in long distances. I was pretty shocked. I tested it many times in many different lighting conditions, and yes, 8 times out of 10, the phone that doesn't even technically let you go beyond the 25x zoom mark in the camera app is actually capturing more information than the phone that's been letting you zoom in 100 times for 4 years now. Samsung's doing a lot more software processing than the iPhone when you zoom into things, and it does sometimes work, but it also sometimes looks so clearly over-sharpened, or almost like it's had to use its imagination to guess what the thing actually looks like, that you'd just rather it didn't. You'd rather the phone just told you, yeah, I don't do 100 times, as opposed to you having to take the shot first to realize. One of the things that Samsung constantly advertises themselves as is the definitive way to record a concert from far away. And that's kind of accurate. It's something the iPhone is distinctly not good at, with its reluctance to switch into its zoom camera, paired with those absolutely heinous internal glass reflections you get from bright light sources. But Samsung does still have a noise problem. Enough of a noise problem that as soon as the lights start to fade or you start to shoot something even remotely not bright, the iPhone's video just starts to look way more comfortable at 5x magnification and also at 10x and beyond. The one thing that Samsung zoom cameras do unarguably do better is zoom consistency. While the iPhone starts to noticeably dip in quality when you get to 3x or 4x, just before that 5x zoom camera activates, because Samsung also has this separate 3x optical zoom camera, it can make sure that your zoom quality stays close to full quality, anywhere between 0.5x and 5x, leading to what I would say is an overall draw, again, in the zoom category. Where this extra 3x lens really helps Samsung out though is in the next one. The ability to take 3x zoom portrait mode shots, as well as 5x zoom portrait mode shots, is an absolute godsend. When Apple announced that the iPhone 15 Pro Max would have a 5x zoom lens instead of the 3x that the 14 Pro Max had, there was a very split reaction. 50% of people loved the fact that you now had a higher magnification, 50% of people relented it for being too much zoom. See, because your zoom lens is also generally the best lens to take portraits, now that the phone only has a 5x, that's so much zoom that, when you're sitting opposite the table from someone and you want to take a portrait of them, you are going to have to stand up and step back to fit them in. But with the Samsung now, you don't have to compromise. You get both options at full optical quality. And that takes it from what was already a beastly camera for portraits with excellent edge detection, flattering image processing, and one of the most natural DSLR-style background blur effects to elite tier. If I had to call something this phone's specialty, I'd probably say it's this. And while the iPhone can shoot portrait mode shots in 24 megapixel compared to Samsung's 12, it can only do that when shooting portrait modes at 1x magnification, which I actually tend not to do much of because 1x isn't as pretty. All right, let's do some audio testing. So right now you're hearing the microphones on the Samsung, which do sound very good indeed, as they do on the iPhone. I mean, not every company pays attention to the microphone quality of their phones. These two do. You can't really go wrong either way. What's actually kind of crazy is that both microphones are so sensitive that you can even whisper, and as long as you're in a quiet environment, you can still pick up the sound clearly. Phones are crazy nowadays. Where they start to diverge though is when you get significant background noise. Like the sound of an active tank in the background. Yeah, Samsung doesn't actually make it sound so bad, it's just that the quality of my voice is cut into as the phone aggressively tries to remove that background noise. Whereas with the iPhone, you hear my voice pretty clearly, but you also hear the tank pretty clearly. Now, just before we bring this all together and shoot one of these guys, we have to tackle the 3 big questions. Who takes better quality photos? Who takes better quality videos? Who handles nighttime better? So, for photos, does the Galaxy S24 Ultra, with its hardware improvements, its software improvements, and its new Pro Visual engine significantly improve upon the core photo quality of the S23 Ultra? Well, I do notice the contrast of shots looking better now. It's very rare to have a washed out photo on the S24. And also, color science. It's refined. Although, I would definitely be clear to say, not perfected. You will still notice some funky lighting in the background being enough to rock the phone's perception of an entire scene. Like, I took some shots with some of you guys that I met while filming, and you can see the lighting of the surrounding area very much bleeding onto our faces on the Samsung. Or for another example, you know when you're zooming into something, very often every one of the different zoom magnifications has a slightly different color profile. So my skin tone actually changes as you go. But it isn't bad, and it's not always one way. There are also occasions where the iPhone goes too far with color and the Samsung gets it right. Dynamic range used to be a blanket Samsung win. iPhones used to suck at being able to control the overexposure of the sky, but that's not true either anymore. There are cases where Samsung does it better still, but also cases where the iPhone leads, like Samsung might overexpose your face when Apple gets it right. So they're about even on that front. But the detail is what secures the iPhone's win. Interestingly, just like the new iPhones, Samsung's S24 Ultra is now capable of shooting photos in 24 megapixel resolution instead of 12. Sadly for Samsung though, while Apple's now made 24 megapixel the default resolution that just happens in auto mode without any compromise, Samsung's 24 megapixel is restricted to the Expert RAW camera app. They've not set it as a default. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe they decided that it makes the shutter time longer and they've just worked so hard to get it down. Whatever the reason, the default in auto mode, and therefore what Samsung recommends you use, is their 12 megapixel mode. And that means detail does still lag behind the Apple. Sometimes you'll notice the difference in clarity a lot, like you can zoom in a whole extra time on the iPhone and get the same level of clarity. Other times it's pretty negligible, but the gap exists. Of course, this being a 200 megapixel sensor means you do get options, like the Samsung can shoot in 50 megapixel mode. Although I still think the iPhone's high-res 48 megapixel mode is a little better. It retains the same quality image processing as your normal photos, whereas for Samsung, you actually notice the quality of processing go down. You're kind of having to trade. But then Samsung also has a full-on 200 megapixel mode, which even though it takes a long time to process the image, is a cool idea. I love the concept of sitting in front of a momentous landscape that I know will be a once-in-a-lifetime view and deciding, yeah, this is where I go all in on maximum resolution. But I still wouldn't necessarily say the 200 megapixel shots are better than the 50 megapixel shots. In the same way that you notice the level of processing go down as you go from 12 to 50, you notice it go down again as you go from 50 to 200, to the point where brighter parts of the image, for example, might just now end up overexposed. One of the new things for Samsung is that they now allow you to shoot photos in HDR, where everything's ultra bright and contrasty. You'll be able to see the preview in HDR while you're taking the shot, and then post directly in HDR to social media, like Instagram. But meh, I mean, I've kind of gone off the idea of HDR. There's actually so many times where I'm purposefully trying to keep my brightness low so that I can properly sleep at night. And in those times, HDR is actually pretty annoying. I turn it off whenever I can. So it may be a factor for you, but it's not personally a factor for me. So iPhone is gonna take it for average photo quality. The only exception to that is the ultra-wide cameras, for which I would say both phones are pretty balanced with their well-matched 12 megapixel sensors. The iPhone's is a tiny bit wider and sometimes does come out with more balanced colors, but also pretty often it feels like Samsung's image processing has cleaned up a scene better. So that's one key question answered. What about video? Samsung made pretty big strides last year with the S23 Ultra's video. I remember taking that phone out for the very first time and nodding my head like a proud father as I noticed the significant strides in noise reduction, the improved dynamic range, and the ability to shoot 8K video without it sucking. So, where does the S24 sit? Well, I would say it's a refinement. It's a subtle neatening up, an S23.5 Ultra, if you will. The level of noise is a tiny bit further lowered, the general day-to-day stabilization a tiny bit better, thanks to the phone now using its gyro sensors to better understand how you're moving your phone. And so what it isn't is more detailed than the iPhone. When you're shooting really well-lit shots during the day, you can look at both and think, well, they're basically the same. And even in a standard night scene, to be fair, there's not a massive amount in it, which is absolutely awesome to see. But it's in the details, when you're cropping in close to a certain part of a video or showing your family your favorite clips on a big TV, the iPhone has enough of a lead in clarity that you probably would notice. And that is a key factor. And it's especially true when you've got really challenging mixed lighting like this. I like the fact that when things are dark, Samsung keeps them dark. But in these situations, it's too much. It's like there's a black hole under this tank that I've just disappeared into. Or like, watch what happens as this tank passes in front of us this. You see how it goes really dark for a second? Yeah, it's too much. It makes it feel like a less balanced camera than the iPhone. By the way, yes, that is actually me driving the tank. Shout out to Armourgeddon, this place is absolutely mental. As for what happens when you try and run after the tank, as most sane people do, the stabilization during video is very much on par and very high tier on both considering how much motion there is. But if you want to go all in on stabilization with the phone's respective super steady and action modes, well then the iPhone just runs away with it. Literally. I don't know what Apple did when designing this feature, but from the moment they launched it, no other phone has overtaken them for their sheer ability to take smooth and yet still high-resolution action scenes. The only final question on our minds then is night photos, which based on Samsung's event is what they've paid particular attention to. And these two phones are very good and very similar. So much so that when you're using night mode, it's in most situations as if you've basically got the exact same photo, but just processed it two different ways. Samsung with a cooler tone and lots of sharpening applied, Apple with a warmer tone and much less sharpening. And one is not really worse than the other. I mean, Samsung absolutely slays the iPhone at moon photos, if that's your cup of tea. The iPhone has no idea what to do or which camera to use, but I also don't want to overweight that because it's not a regular thing you're going to be doing. And then the iPhone is slightly better at night portraits, just in the sense that it manages to make them feel like normal photos, whereas the Samsung really makes it look like it's using a special mode and filter. And also something that we've been seeing in other parts of the comparison too, but that's particularly noticeable at night, the iPhone is better able to deal with color. Like this shot of me on the bench, we took it like 15 different times as the bench cycled through every single color, and each time, the iPhone just got it. The exposure was better controlled and the colors much more realistic to what we were seeing. So, what does that leave us with? Well, 6.5 to Samsung, 4.5 to the iPhone. Samsung has clawed back a lot this generation. Less in terms of the actual output getting significantly better, although there are improvements there too. The biggest thing is the experience of taking photos, the much smoother camera app, the much faster shutter speed, the highly advanced new editing tools. And so, even though this doesn't mean that Samsung wins at everything, because the iPhone does win some important categories, well,
I can't believe we're actually doing this, but a promise is a promise. On you go. Oh, and if you're enjoying this video, then a sub to the channel would be wonderful. Right. This tank is about to fire a 100-mile-an-hour, highly explosive paint grenade. Trust me, you would not want to get hit by one of these. And now, we just shoot. 3, 2, 1. Did we kill it? Did we kill it? Did we? No, we didn't. Phone is completely alive and unmarked. Ball's in your court for next time, Apple.